I think the challenge is that everybody wants the best for our kids, and the old saying, there's nothing too good for my kids, and they deserve the best, and all that, which is all well and good and true until you start getting into college, and then you realize that what could be the best could be crazy expensive.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I am your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. The rising cost of college is in the news once again, as are 529 plans and student loan repayment. As a result, I wanted to revisit the topic of paying for college and how to balance saving for college with saving for retirement. My guest to help unpack these issues is Brad Baldridge. Brad is a college funding specialist and the host of the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Brad has helped thousands of families plan for the expenses of college, and I'm grateful that he agreed to share some of his insights here. This podcast was sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. And now, the interview.
Well, I've been a financial planner for many, many years, and college was a piece of the puzzle long ago, but it wasn't a big piece. And that, of course, has started changing in the 80s, 90s, and it got in the 2000s, it got crazy where all of a sudden college was going up a lot, and it was really being talked about. The inflation rate for college is double what everything else is, and all that kind of stuff. And the reality of it is, it started becoming a bigger piece of the pie. So I started specializing in some of that type of thing. And as I helped families, I realized that there was lots that families could do. They just didn't understand the system, because the system is complicated. And as they add more programs and loan forgiveness and all these different programs on top of layers upon layers, it gets more and more complicated. So for a lot of families, there's various programs that are there to help, but you need to figure out, well, which ones do I qualify for, and how does that fit into my overall plan? And will scholarships really be there for me, or do I need to save more? And how does it all come together? And the more I got involved in it, the more I realized that people needed it, and I enjoyed it. So I started focusing on it more and more. And then about 8 years ago, I launched a podcast and a website kind of dedicated to college planning, and I guess the rest is history.
And one of the things that you addressed is this, what I consider to be a dilemma between saving for your own retirement and saving for college. You and I both have, if I'm not mistaken, you have children who are either they've just started college or they're going to be going into college. And the other message that I'm hearing is you have to be prepared to support those kids when they get out of college as well, because they're going to come out and they're not going to be able to afford to live on their own. So you better have money in place to take care of them after you put them through college. At least that's part of what I'm hearing. So what's your take on this dilemma between saving for your own individual wealth and saving for or preparing for your child's college?
Yeah, I think the challenge is that everybody wants the best for our kids, and the old saying, there's nothing too good for my kids, and they deserve the best, and all that, which is all well and good and true until you start getting into college, and then you realize that what could be the best could be crazy expensive.
Hmm.
And I think that's where some families need to start drawing the line. So, and there's the arguments out there, well, is college really worth it? And there's these arguments around doing the math, right? Well, if I get this degree and I could do this and I would make this much more money, and you can compare that to this path and all that kind of thing, which kind of misses the point for most families and students, in that they have career goals, and
Hmm.
some career goals require college and some of them don't. So if you want to be a veterinarian, you're probably going to have to go to college. If you want to be a nurse, you're going to have to go to college. If you want to, you know, sell something, if you want to sell MRI machines, well, you can get into sales without college. You can get into sales with college. You
Mm.
have to, there's two paths there. So you have to decide which path makes more sense. And I think that's the challenge is figuring out what you want to be when you grow up and then actually making it happen. Now, on the flip side of that is there's a whole lot of parents out there now that have a college education. I'm a great example of that. I have a degree who had a great time in college and they really want that for their kids.
Mm.
So, and if they're reasonably successful, they can make it happen. And therefore, they're willing to pay what it takes to get their student off to that 4 year degree where they're on campus and living the dream, so to speak. Now, that's not a good fit for every student. I think that's the challenge, right? College for everyone is not a good goal, in my opinion. Education for everyone, yes, but education isn't always college, and we need to broaden the perspective and start, picking things that are more appropriate for kids. And again, college is right for a big chunk of the population, but maybe half, not everybody, and
Right.
that's I think is the biggest challenge. So that's where it all kind of weaves together. Of parents have dreams and aspirations, and the students may have dreams and aspirations, and to make it all come together, college may be required,
Hmm.
or at least maybe college is just desired. I'd really love it if they went to college. I don't even care if they use their degree. I mean, there's lots of parents out there. They can go to college and then they can do whatever they want. I don't care, but they have to get that degree because I feel like that's what they need to be prepared for life. Which again, and there's some validity to that as well. So that, but then when you start looking at the cost and how the
Right.
system works, well, they base the price of college a lot on how much mom and dad earn and how much mom and dad have saved, especially for kids that are rolling out of high school and going directly to college. So now mom and dad are on the hook to figure out how to pay for it, especially if they earn enough that they could afford to pay some. Well, they're going to be expected to pay for
Right.
some. And I think that's where the rub comes in, where I see a lot of families, let's say they earn $200,000 a year. And most families that earn $200,000 a year have a $200,000 a year lifestyle, and they spend most of what they earn. And then when college comes along and college says, well, we need an extra 1,000 a month or 2,000 a month to make this work. They're
Mm.
like, wow, we don't have that. Of course, the next family that earns 100,000 is in the same boat, and they're saying, well, we don't have 1,000 a month to do it either. But that guy over there that earns 200,000, I don't know what he's complaining about. He earns enough. I mean, he earns 100,000 more than us. He should be able to easily pay for college. But it's bigger garage theory. I don't care how big your garage is, it's always full because
Right.
you just get more stuff until it's full, and you don't think about downsizing or right sizing it until your garage is full. And it's just like families and what you earn, right? You grow your lifestyle to fill up whatever you earn if you're not careful. And if you don't include college in those plans, then when college hits, it's a shock. And for a lot of families, they're just not fully cognizant of what it might cost, or things change and all of a sudden they're on
Hmm.
the hook for more than they thought. And I think that's the biggest challenge is if college is truly important to you. If you did a survey and asked 100 families what's most important to you when it comes to financial goals, almost all of them that have children are going to say education and retirement, and then maybe some other goals, but those two things are going to come up. Yeah, when you actually look at where a lot of families save and invest and put their money, it's everywhere except education and retirement,
Right.
where a lot of times they get the short end of the stick because we've got other goals as well that we don't verbalize as much, like vacations and sports for the kids and all the different things that we can spend money on. So I think that's the big challenge.
Well, Brad, we're also procrastinators. I think. I mean, I think that's something. I think that. And look, I'm as guilty of this as the next person. I think that I can start saving for that tomorrow. I can start putting away for retirement. I can start saving for college tomorrow. I have to get over this hump. Or with the next raise, I'm going to set aside this amount. You used a really interesting phrase when you were talking about the bigger garage theory, and you talked about having making 200,000 and having a $200,000 lifestyle. Is this something that you kind of literally advise people on? Is if you're making 200, let's get you at a 150 lifestyle so that you have that extra savings.
Right. Well, exactly. And I would agree that for most families, or a lot of families, that your earnings are still climbing as your kids are rolling
Mhm.
into college, right? So when your kids are in grade school and high school, there's a lot of people that are getting promotions or getting that new job that pays a little better or a lot better. And again, not everybody. Some families it's going the wrong way where they lose the good paying job and they
Mm.
can't find it. So it depends on the economy and that type of thing. But I think procrastination is key to that, where we say things like, well, I mean, when the kids are in daycare, we can't afford to save. I mean, we're spending thousands a month on daycare. How are we going to make this work?
Right.
When daycare is done, things will get better. And the whole idea that kids get cheaper is a fallacy for those of us that have had kids and raised them through adulthood. I had my oldest is 20 and he's not gotten cheaper yet. So, I'm still waiting for that day. And I think that's the challenge, right? Is we don't know what the future holds, but where we can kind of bake it into the system is when we decided whether or not we should, buy a second home or buy the lake home, or whether or not we should buy the fourth car for the family. Because man, that makes it convenient if everybody just has their own car,
Right.
and it's just a few hundred a month more, a few thousand a year, or 10,000, whatever it might be, right? And then, but when you do the math and say, well, that could have been saved for college or could have been put towards education. Private high schools and grade schools is another great example of, lots of money flowing out. And I'm not
Right.
saying they're not worth it. In some cases, it's a good fit and it needs to, it's a good plan. But when you make these decisions, you got to look at the big picture too. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of spur the moment of, something's going on at this high school. We're going to switch over to that high school and
Right.
pay 15,000 a year. And it's like, well, what's the net effect to college? And of course, the high school is going to sell us that, oh, all these kids get scholarships. And it's like, yes, they do, but it doesn't cover the whole cost. So you're still going to have to pay for college. But anyway, I digress. The more you get involved in it, the more you realize that the big decisions,
Hmm.
we upgraded the house or did an addition, or we bought a big home, or we buy more cars than we need, or we sign up for the expensive sports, or whatever it might be. Those can have a big impact. And then it's also all the little things, right? Of all the kids' expenses that kind of just a million little things happen, right? Where prom is this and lunches are that, and it just all adds up. So just again, coming up with the good solution there is a challenge for a lot of families, but it certainly can be done. I mean, if you look at a college campus, they're full,
Right.
so they're all getting there somehow. So that's the flip side. But what we want to do
Well,
is do it as efficiently as we can, so that
right.
we're not you know impacting our retirement or using a bunch of debt in order to make it work.
Well, I think though, when we look at that full campus and when we think about these savings, I think that there's also a tremendous amount of guilt that we haven't started already, that we didn't have a better plan. And contrary to many beliefs, I was raised Roman Catholic, and Catholics believe that guilt is a motivator. And I think that in my experience, guilt actually paralyzes us a little bit. We don't actually take the steps. So for all of those parents who are listening and they feel guilty that they haven't started already, or that they're looking around, and of course when parents talk to each other, they always put forward the best face. So my listeners might think that everybody in their peer group already has taken care of this issue. They've already put the savings in place. They're already doing everything they're supposed to be doing. what is your recommendation for that first step? What's the first step that somebody takes to put themselves back on the right track?
Right. Yeah. So now, when we start getting into actual college planning, I think it's helpful to break our listeners into two groups. All right. So we've got what we would call late stage planning and early stage planning. So late stage planning, which is a little simpler to comprehend, is you've got kids in high school and or at college, and it's here, right? You actually have to start picking colleges and apply and do all the work. Early stage is up through middle school. So some listeners might say, "Hey, we're pregnant. Let's start saving for college." Others might be, we finished daycare. It's time to start doing what we need to do or whatever it might be. So in the early stage, it's like, well, we don't even know for sure that they're going to college, but maybe we should save and invest some, and all that planning is good and should be done. But no matter how well you did early stage, when you get to late stage, you're going to have to do even more. So now you're visiting colleges and trying to figure out, what do I want to be when I grow up, and will we get need-based aid and merit aid? And this is where I help a lot of families one-on-one, where we're literally trying to figure out what's a good fit college, not just academically, but also financially. And how are we going to pay for it? And, lots of families roll in with some savings, but when we start doing the math, they're coming up short. And sometimes it's that decision, right? It's not unusual at the end of the process to say, all right, well, here's the 5 schools we applied to. This one's going to be net out at 25,000 a year. This one's 28,000. This one's 32,000. But of course, the one we really like is netting out at 54,000. And then there's this real outlier that's 80. And it's like, well, we like it for 54, but we could go for 24. Is it worth $30,000 a year more to go to this school instead of that school?
Right.
And those are some of the tough decisions. And if you're not prepared, there's a lot of knee jerk reactions. And I think the way the system works for a lot of families, you don't know what they're going to cost until the 11th hour, until near the end of the senior year, where you get a final financial offer. And then you just have a few weeks to make a decision. And of course, there's loans out there that can fill that gap. So in an emergency, you can just sign up for a loan. Parents can, not students generally, but parents can sign up for a big loan that will fill the gap, and you can make it happen. But I think the challenge is, had you known that some schools are going to be more expensive than others, would you have done things differently earlier on? Because I think a lot of times, there's schools out there that both parents love and students love, and sometimes they're the same schools, sometimes they're different, but the whole process is overwhelming and confusing. And by the time you come out the other end, it's easy to make mistakes like not realize that there's some schools that are a better fit financially.
Right.
Because your student's eligible for merit aid, well, you want to look at schools that offer merit aid, or your student's eligible for need-based aid, and these types of schools are better for that. Or maybe it's, we're not going to get a lot of aid no matter what we do, but the low-cost state schools are the best fit because of that. And I think that's, broadly speaking, picking a school that makes sense for a lot of families. And I believe there's lots of schools that are a good fit for a student.
Right.
That there isn't the perfect school. And that, I think that's a challenge for some students. They think that there is that school.
Right.
And they look at 5 schools and they say, well, I like this school, but here's the pros and cons. And I like that school, but here's the pros and cons. And none of them check every box. None of them are perfect. And it's like, well, and it's like buying a car, right? I really want heated seats, but the one I really like doesn't have heated seats. What do I do about that? Well, there's aftermarket. I can live without heated seats. I can move to Florida, whatever it is. There's ways around a lot of this.
Because you mentioned this a couple of times. You said, well, is it worth it, right? And when talking about, is this more expensive college worth it? How do you recommend families go about deciding if it's worth it? Because again, we know there's some really good data out there, Brad, about, for example, in recessions, parents spending on their kids doesn't go down. We cut back on everything else except for what we spend on our kids. Parents are bad at making sensible financial decisions when it comes to giving their kids things that their kids want. I'm just looking at the data, right? So how How do you decide if it's worth it? Are there tips or tricks, or what do you recommend a family goes through to decide, is it worth it to pay this much for this college or spend half as much on this one?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's a personal decision. And what I like to say is, for families that are giving up the lake home so they can spend crazy amounts of money on college, well, that's just a decision, right? Or if you're giving up the fancy sports car so you can spend lots of money on
Right,
college, well, you got it and you get to spend it how you see fit. And if
right,
education is more important than exotic vacations, well, great. Spend it where you want. It's your money.
right.
Now, when you start getting into, well, we don't can't really afford these colleges, we're going to have to take a bunch of debt to cover them,
Mhm.
or delay our retirement a crazy amount. That's when I think you need to start making some of the hard and tough decisions. Um, and a lot of times, you take a typical teenager, right? So when they turn 12 or 13 or whatever the age is at your house, and they say, "Wow, I'd really like that iPhone." Well, the next birthday or Christmas, ta-da, there's an iPhone. And then they turn 16, 17, 18, whatever, and they're really busy at school and sports and staying after school, and mom and dad taxi service is getting really tired of it. So and the kid says, if there's a used car available, I could just drive myself everywhere and make everybody's life easier. And parents are like, yeah, that makes sense. And next thing you know, maybe a nicer car, used car, something shows up in the driveway that the kids can drive. And then next is college. And as far as the students are concerned, that's the next step, and mom and dad are going to deliver, right? They don't know much difference between $1,000 iPhone or a $10,000 car or $100,000 education. They're all big numbers. They're all very expensive, and to them anyway. And they've not, again, they just can't conceptualize the difference, and they don't really understand. And I think that's where the parents need to be the adults in the room and have those
Right.
discussions and start talking about, well, if we borrow $100,000 and you have to pay that back, we're talking thousands, 1,000 a month or more for 10 years or 15 years, and that could be a challenge. And sometimes parents are willing to take it on because they can afford to, or they have the money, and sometimes they're willing to push that onto their kids. But I don't think most kids understand when they just sign up for all these loans what they're really signing up for. And that's the other piece of it, is the typical undergrad can't
Right.
borrow a whole lot in their own name. They can borrow 5,500 as a freshman and 6,500 as a sophomore and 7,500 as a junior and senior. After that, mom and dad can co-sign loans for the student, and mom and dad could borrow in their own name, and then the mom and dad pay it back. But generally speaking, kids that can't get themselves way over their head by themselves, mom and dad have to co-sign or somehow facilitate it. And in those situations, again, I think it's on the parents to make wiser decisions and understand and do their homework. I mean, it's because of the way college works. I see some frustration when parents learn that, oh, I could have gone to a similar school, maybe even in the same town. I just didn't realize it. And they would have offered me a much better scholarship. It's kind of like when you drive a car off the lot
Right.
and you realize the dealer across the street was offering 50% off. You just didn't know. So you ended up buying at the wrong dealership. But the same is true with college, where you don't really know what the prices are going in, and that's changing. We're building software now in the financial planning community that has some of
Okay.
those answers, and that's something I help families with. Is there's ways to figure it out, but it's a lot of work, and you need to do it up front, in my opinion.
Well, there's two things in your comments just now that I want to address. And the first is, and I don't mean to sound cheeky about this, but when you're talking about added expenses, you said many times as a financial planner that this is something that you help your clients with as a financial planner. If I'm looking to cut back on expenses, Brad, why would I pay for a financial planner? What is a financial planner going to do for me? And like, what kind of expense am I talking about?
Right. Well, and again, let's not focus too much on cutting back on expenses, where people feel like, oh, I'm going to sacrifice my lifestyle.
Hmm.
A lot of times, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about expenses that maybe aren't adding a lot of value.
Okay.
right? So I like to pick on cable TV. It's like, well, all the kids are off to college. Why do we still have cable TV on 6 TVs, right? And again, a lot of us don't anymore. We're cutting the cord is a big thing these days, but so I have to find something else to pick on. But in the end, a lot of families just aren't doing things very efficiently. Where if we just did it a little more efficiently, if we paid less in taxes, if we paid less than interest, if we paid less in expenses that aren't giving us much value, we would be able to afford more college. And if we just paid less for college, that would work out as well. So in the actual, so having the extra cash flow to cover college is again working through your expenses and all that kind of stuff. But the other side of it is there's two steps to college. One is getting the lowest net price. So Stanford is $85,000 a year if you make lots of money.
Right.
If you show any sort of need at all, they just had a press release about a year ago. If your family earns 100,000 or less, Stanford will be free. You will pay zero tuition and zero room and board.
Right.
They will cover it all. If your family earns between 100 and 150, they guarantee they'll cover tuition, but you may have to pay some towards room and board.
Right.
And then a sliding scale from then on up. So the reality of it is Stanford could be the cheapest one, even though it lists it one of the more expensive ones.
Right.
You just have to understand that. And of course, then you also have to have the kind of student that can get accepted at Stanford, which is
right.
no small feat. But if you've got that rock star that can get into Stanford, don't cross it off the list, because your net cost at Stanford will probably be very affordable because of the way they set things up. If the people that pay $85,000 at Stanford are the kind of people that say paying $85,000 for college is no big deal.
No big deal. Right.
So
right.
And that's the other flip side, right? I have had people be angry at schools like Stanford that say, well, they're making me pay full price. These other schools are offering all these scholarships. And it's like, well, you should have known that Stanford only gives scholarships based on need.
Right.
So you're never going to have a student that's strong enough to get a scholarship at Stanford. So a student that can get into Stanford can get need-based aid but no merit aid. And a student that's that strong could get merit aid at many other schools.
Right.
They're just not Stanford. They don't have the cachet, perhaps. And some of them will, right? So it's understanding the landscape. So our goal is to get the lowest net cost for college. So that might be expensive schools with lots of scholarships and grants and benefits, or it might be a low-cost state school, but we don't get a lot. And whatever combination. That's step one. And then step two is, for most families, especially once you're middle income and up, you're going to have to pay something for college. And how do we pay whatever that is as efficient as possible? Whether it's saving and investing or taking the right loans or negotiating or all the different strategies, making sure you get all the tax breaks you can get, making sure you get all the lowest interest you could pay if you're paying on loans. By the time you add all that up, one path could be tens of thousands of dollars different than a different path. And it's just this complicated puzzle. It's something that I enjoy doing. Most people
right.
would rather pull out their hair, but and again, it's one of these things where, especially for like small business owners or people that have inheritances or where life is a little more complicated, there's a lot of moving parts and there's ways we can take advantage of it. But you really have to understand the system and spend the time to figure it out. So either you have to jump in and,
right.
A lot of people think, well, I'm going to do my college plan this weekend. It's like, no, you're not. It's going to take you many weekends of visiting schools and learning the system and understanding how it all works. And then it also evolves, right? You don't do a college plan one time and you're done. It's, when I'm working with parents, usually we start sophomore, junior year, maybe freshman year. Occasionally we have what we call the hair on fire parents of seniors that are just, really in a pinch and we can bail them out, but it's not ideal. But you visit schools, you get a lay of the land, you talk about what are we going to do around testing, what kind of scholarships are we interested in, what kind of colleges are we looking for, and then you do some visits and you do some research and you do the math on how much we've saved and try and figure out, well, how am I going to be fair if you've got multiple kids, and start really working through it. And it's a process where, you know, you work on it over a year or two.
Well, and let me go back then, because I'm going to go back to my guilt question or my guilt point from earlier. So if you're somebody who is afraid of dentists, and you know that you don't go to dentists very often, that becomes this perpetuating thing where you're
Yeah.
not going to go because you're sure that the first moment that you step foot inside a dentist's office, they're going to berate you for not being better at getting to the dentist. So, all of these things that you're talking about that a financial planner can do for you, if I'm somebody who is behind in my financial planning, if my financial house isn't necessarily in order, because these are things that confuse me or that I dislike or that just make me go numb, um, it seems like I might be less likely to seek out a financial planner because I don't want to be berated. I don't want to this person to tell me that about all the stuff that I should have done. And I know I'm bad at this, right? What can somebody expect when they reach out to a financial planner?
Right. Well, and again, there's a small subset of financial planners that specialize in college. So I
Hmm.
guess that's the first thing. So not all financial planners really understand the financial system when it comes to college.
Okay.
They might work with we've got a 4-year old and our goal is to save $100,000. Well, they have a calculator. They can do the math and say, well, if you expect 5% rate of return, you need to put this much a month
Right.
and you'll have $100,000. Of course, I would argue that, well, where did $100,000 come from? And is that a realistic goal based on, where you want to go to college, et cetera, et cetera. So, so that's the first step. But once we're doing the late stage again, what do I want to be when I grow up? We're visiting colleges. We're trying to put this all together. I think that's where, again, we don't spend a lot of time on what you could and should because there's so much that we have to get going on and do,
Mhm.
whatever it might be, right? So a lot of times when someone is showing up with a sophomore, it doesn't really matter if you show up with nothing or if you show up with a big pile of money saved. No matter what, it's still going to be a process of how do we use that money efficiently if you've got a big pile of money, and maybe we don't have to do a lot of saving. But
Hmm.
that's, and again, the reality is for many families, they're still going to want to save because a lot of times what happens is if you've got what it takes to go to this tier of schools, a lot of times families are going to say, well, what about the next tier up? What about if we went to that little more expensive private school, or what if we went out of state? Um, and then maybe end up spending a little bit more. So then, and again, it's just like when we buy a car. Not everybody drives the cheapest car they can find.
Hmm.
Some of us have, we need something that has towing capacity because we own a
Sure.
boat, or we need a minivan because we have a lot of kids, or so we're picking what's a good fit for us. And it's the same with college. What's a good fit for some families? The lowest cost option is what we're working at and trying to make it happen as cheaply as possible. But there's many families out there where cheap isn't the goal. It's the best fit and how do we pay for whatever we choose efficiently. Just like if you bought that $100,000 sports car,
Right.
you don't want to waste money in financing it or that type of thing. If you can buy it efficiently and still have the car, but save money while doing it, that I think is the goal for a lot of families.
Brad, you mentioned that not all financial planners are going to understand some of the intricacies, especially around what college might cost, how you actually project those costs and save for them. I mean, not everybody is going to be able to hire you, for example, when they go about looking for somebody to help them plan for college. What sort of things should they be looking at when they're evaluating financial planners? What sort of what are the hallmarks of a financial planner that really understands saving and preparing for college?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I would ask questions about, well, how many students have they actually helped and
Mm,
what is their experience? I think that's the biggest one. Because I caution families all the time that say things, because you hear this a lot, right? Well, I was at the football game or something, and I was talking to my brother-in-law who has kids that are a little older than me, and he said he
right.
did this and it worked great. And I was like, okay, well, if your kids are identical to his, and if your income and your financial situation is the same, and his good plan may work for you,
Right.
but if you're different, he might be giving you bad advice, because I think that's where, again, merit aid and need-based aid are based on factors that most people don't understand. So a lot of people will say things like, well, I got a bunch of aid by doing this. And it's like, no, that's not really it wasn't what you did. It was the fact that you have a need, or that you have a really
Mm-hmm.
strong student, or some combination. So I think that's the biggest caution, is understanding that someone with experience can start comparing like to like. And, the families that are earning 75 and $100,000 have different planning opportunities than families that are earning $200,000 and $300,000.
Right. Right.
Um, and the very low income, which again, they have a lot of systems in place that as well that are available. And then sometimes, with business owners and people that lose their employment and stuff like that, you kind of move around. You say, well, I was here, but now because I lost my job or my business isn't doing well, I had a bad year or a bad couple of years, and now, but then I'm recovering, right? My income is going to climb. Now what, right? I could get aid the first year or two because my business was tanked, but
Mm.
since then I closed the business and got a great paying job. So now what's going to happen in the future when my taxes aren't so low anymore? And really understanding that whole process, I think, is important for a lot of families.
Well, Brad, I want to thank you so much for thinking about these issues when so many of us just don't like to. So I'm glad that there's somebody like you out there that is thinking about these issues and helping families. And thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That was Brad Baldridge. For more information about Brad, please visit our website, talkingaboutkids.com. From there, you also can find out about upcoming episodes, suggest a topic, learn more about me and my books, or submit your questions for future guests. Our theme song is by The Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and the young humans, and the difference is the young goats are easier to manage.